So this session is really important in that quite a few of you have been asking what happens both after 1st of July and then what happens with the funding and what happens for phase 1 and then phase 2. So I'm sorry that this has come at the end of your 2 days and probably might answer some of those questions, but I think it has been a logical process for you to start to look at what you do want to start to implement, and then hopefully my presentation will answer some of those questions. And certainly you need to ask me questions, so interrupt and ask the questions if you have them as we go. So some of the slides that you've seen a lot of now, so you don't need to know. So hopefully you will have a clearer idea as to which of the changes that you want to start to implement that have been tested, that you'll know which step you're on for some of those, and recognising again that you're all at slightly different stages, which is fine. So I want to reiterate what Brandon also presented yesterday about the implementing changes, and recognising we're implementing changes in a complex system. It's not just a simple, you know, this is what you need to do and go out and do it. So it's recognising that for us to be effective in implementing those changes, we need to manage the implementation as a series of PDSA cycles. So it's different to, and you've spent lots of time on looking at what that might be. And then we need to think about providing support for you to be able to ensure that that improvement is achieved and supported. So that's about, over the next 3 months, you working with your project managers and the IAs as to what support you require, both from us as a campaign team, from the services that you're working within, organisations, that sort of thing, and what would you require to maintain the improvements, so that obviously we're not going to go on forever supporting these collaboratives, and they do need to be time framed, but we are flexible in looking at, it's not all going to stop on the 1st of July, but we need to know what's required beyond that. So your next 3 months is your opportunity to look at what that might look like, and I'm relying on you as teams to inform us as a campaign team so that we can make sure that's provided for. And addressing the social aspects of implementing change. So I think it was really important to start looking at that yesterday with Brandon's session, and recognising that we are changing the status quo a lot of the time, and that is hard, and there will be some barriers. So, and a lot of it's around the social aspect. So we can continue to look at that over the next couple of months as you start to look at what some of those changes are from a social aspect. I mean, there will be others, but those are the most important ones. Okay, so this is a picture or a diagram that you will have seen a lot, but I think what is important in that we are starting to look at the implementation phase. So we're at learning session 3, as hopefully you realise. So we've got, I think, probably the next 3 months to start to look at your plans and your changes that you want to implement permanently, and look at what resources and what the model will be and what that looks like and requires to actually implement. Now, I think it's really important to start to identify what we're talking about implementation. So if I can use some examples, it might be easier. So better breathing for pulmonary rehab, you've got 2 programs in Otara and Franklin Pukekohe. So what we would expect is that if you've decided to implement, which I'm assuming you are, those are the 2 places that you would look to implement permanently the changes. So we're not talking about you implementing anywhere else, just in those 2 sites. And so therefore, once you've done that, we will, and we'll fund the requirements for that, for staffing and equipment and everything that's required for that from the campaign funding, and we've committed for that for another year. So that this gives the organisation a transition time from this budget that has already probably been set. I'm not sure that it's been finally approved, but gives the organisation time to transition to the following financial year to know what they need to budget for. So I would expect that the organisation will be looking, and localities will be looking at their budgets for spread in the next financial year. So that's a really good example that if localities want to pick up a pulmonary and cardiac rehab program, they'll know from our modelling how it would need to be resourced, what the program would be, what the model of care is, and the staffing required for that, and then they can say, yes, we want one of those in, say, Mangere, and they can implement it because you've done the packaging for it. So another example would be View. The campaign's topped up FTE for View. It's not the total cost of View, obviously, but what we've committed to is another 12 months of funding for whatever resources that we've got now for you to implement permanently the changes. But we're not expecting to fund you to spread right throughout counties, only for what you've wanting to implement permanently. Some other changes would be ERAS. We've funded the nurse position, and I've committed to Mary Burr that we would fund that for a further 6 months, because that's what they require for them to be able to implement permanently. And then I think there are some national programs that will be looked at, so they'll need to transition into that. Pharmacists for Smooth, we'd commit for a further 12 months for those positions, and then that gives your service time to either transition that budget into wherever they want it to be, or throughout other services, or even in localities. So those are some of the examples of how I'm imagining the implementation will continue to be funded. Have you got some questions about that? There are some of you that haven't really taken up a lot of resource from the campaign as far as money goes, and Carol Slade's smirking away there. Yes, or magnets. I'm not going to fund magnets for life, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we've done some really small things for Delirium, as the stamps, and, you know, it's quite fun, but yeah, there'll be a cost for stamps. I think we could probably commit to that for another year. Mainly your work is, and a bit similar to hip fracture, it might be some more resourcing for physio at weekends, I'm not sure. But what I'm relying on you all is to talk and work with your project managers and IAs to say, this is what we will require from a resourcing point of view for the next however many months, so that we can manage the phasing out for phase 1, and then we've got the work of the phase 2 to start to look at too, and manage that budget. Not that it's really got a budget, but that's all right. Yeah, so does that explain the implementation side of it? Transitions of care, you really haven't cost me anything. So we'll continue to fund that. But yeah, so it's not that we're looking to fund things, but really start to identify after the work that you've done over the 2 days what really does need to continue and what will be permanently implemented. Good. I thought there'd be more questions about that, but everyone's happy. That's good. So the other time frame which leads into that is I've had this discussion with Jenny Coles and her group of general managers, and at the Systems Integration Board, where we've put it to them a process for approval for implementation, because